Historia Canadiana is recorded on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Cultural History of Canada, the show where we just talk about stuff. Sometimes we get emails from people saying how we're wrong about stuff.
How we are found a way to intellectually be misandrous.
And we're in an episode where we didn't talk about that at all.
Yeah. We intellectually hate men, which, fair.
Good. Yep. It's not
I pick
that
the
hard.
bear every time.
We're off to a strong start, as usual.
Speaking of bears.
So, first of all, thank you for our supporters on Patreon who put up with this nonsense every so often. You're great. You're all wonderful. You all know who you are. Thank you for
For
supporting
those
the
who
show.
think this show is stupid, just listen to the Pop Canada show. It's even stupider.
Or read the comments on some of our episodes, which are equally stupid. But we have been getting good reviews overall. It's just weird comments every once in a while. Anyway, my name is Patrick, and with me, as always, is my pal in exile, Mac. That doesn't rhyme as well as I thought it was, but whatever.
Mac attack, baby. Woo!
Let's go.
Call me Napoleon because I'm in exile on an island.
Did I tell you, this is already off to a divergent start, that one of my students in the middle of class, her ringtone went off and it was literally just which completely derailed everything about the class.
God.
It was great. So basically the theme for today is capping off our series of episodes on the Depression with a leader that I think we can sum up with a single word, and that is dipshit. That's my thesis for this episode is R.B. Bennett sucks. He sucks on toast. He did some okay things, but ultimately sucks on toast. He's going to be
R.B. Bennett
near
sucks the most. R.B. Bennett sucks on toast.
He's going to probably end up towards the bottom of our list.
R.B. Bennett faces a roast.
Thank you. Now, again, that's not to say that he didn't do some good stuff, and probably not a lot of people could have done anything great during the Depression. But yeah, he's also just a perfect encapsulation.
I mean, take a look at what happened to Germany during the Depression. They did okay.
I'm just going to... No.
Wah.
I'm not going to open that one.
Hey, I have students who have said that to me.
If you squint, technically that's true.
In a vacuum, sure.
In a vacuum for a very specific part of their population, but that's it.
Didn't last too long either.
Yeah. Anyway, what do you know about Prime Minister Bennett?
I know he was Prime Minister.
Okay.
Hold on. What else do I know about? I feel like I've heard of Bennett before. Like there was a building or something. You know what I mean?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Like a building named after him.
Possibly. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, we did talk about him also in previous episodes. There's a car named after him, or a car style. Do you remember that one when we talked about the
Great Depression?
Yeah.
That's what I thought we had done our Bennett episode already.
Well, we kind of alluded to how other people talked about him, right? But we didn't talk him about on a political level.
Right. Right, because before we did Mackenzie King, we did the other guy who faced King.
Yes. Arthur Meehan.
Yes.
He got wrecked.
Right. Riggedy wrecked.
This conservative at least has the advantage of actually being a good politician, whereas Meehan just sucks even more. He just didn't.
Meehan was just a mathematician.
Exactly. Whereas at least Bennett was the other worst thing that you can be, a lawyer. So he's got that going for him, I guess. I don't know if we have any lawyer listeners, but whatever. I just insulted all. So yeah, this is one of the prime ministers who was born in the Maritimes. Right? He was born specifically in Hopewell Hill, which sounds quaint. It's in New Brunswick, so it probably is quaint because everything in. So he was born there in 1870, and as usual, and what seems pretty common with this time, as we talked about with Mackenzie King briefly, this guy was a mama's boy. So we have our second prime minister in a row that's just a mama's boy, and that's fun. This one didn't talk to his dead mom, though, so that's better.
Didn't purport to that we know of.
Or claims to not have done that. He didn't write about it in his journal, at least.
There you go.
But yeah, he was someone who was very influenced by his mom. So his mother was called Henrietta Stiles, of her maiden name. And she was a staunch
Mm-hmm.
Wesleyan Methodist, which is a rather conservative type of Protestantism. Very, very diligent, right, and very strict, both personally and socially speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And his father, on the other hand, was a Baptist, so still part of that tradition of Protestantism. But Henry J. Bennett, his father, was much more easygoing. He was, much more open to alcohol and was actually quite an alcoholic, apparently, and didn't really buy into this whole religious thing as much as his mother did.
Right.
But ultimately Henrietta's way of life was what would take over R.B. Bennett, right? And it was very much a philosophy of hard work and self-denial, and anything that you typically associate with contemporary conservatism, right? For good or ill,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what was instilled into him from a very young age. And the way that I saw it in one book that I read was that they were very charitable to the outside world, right? That's part of most Christian doctrine. But
Mm-hmm.
on themselves, they were very exacting and demanding, right? A lot of personal hardship was kind of self-imposed onto the family and individual. Keep that in mind for the future and how Bennett would perhaps take the wrong message from this. In another very apt indication of how the world has changed, he was actually able to start teaching school at the age of 16.
What?
Yeah, he was a teacher, a preschool teacher, and
Oh
young school
no.
teacher at 16,
Oh no.
which either says a lot about New Brunswick, about the 19th century, or just
What about
the
teaching?
guy, or teaching. I don't
The
know.
standards of teaching.
Look, I have a lot of difficulty with the standards of teaching today, but I would not want a 16-year-old anywhere near a classroom.
No.
Not even a
Not even
19th
close.
century Baptist or Methodist
Well, I
kid.
mean,
No,
yeah, like those classes, they're not learning much, sure, but you still don't want kids in there.
no. You're hopped up on hormones and just wanting to do anything but be. Why would you do that?
Well, even you're so easily influenced, like you're just gonna believe what anybody else tells you, and then you're gonna have to like, oh
Yeah,
God.
exactly. Right. So basically, he used his salary as a young teacher to put himself through law school, because you could do that at the time
That's
quite
nice, I
easily.
guess.
Right. Exactly. Um, and so he graduated from Dalhousie, which is obviously quite a prestigious and good university. He graduated from there when he was 23. And he actually graduated near the top of his class. So good for him for
Good for
actually
him.
doing the work. This is one of the rare times that I will be complimenting R.B. Bennett. Favorite listeners.
Savor it. Save it for
Yeah,
later. It won't happen again.
but basically he would leverage this to slowly work his way out of what had been relative poverty for his family at that time. In the 1870s and 80s, had been a wave of an economic slump in Canada, and the Maritimes are often the ones that are at the forefront of these types of slumping.
Yeah. And then the
Mostly because
1920s would come and say, want to see me do it again?
how about Depression 2, Electric Boogaloo? This time it's nuclear.
Depression 2, Bennett Mobile Boogaloo.
Or Bennett Mobile than Bennett Buggy. I think that's good. Yeah. So yeah, basically, he would start his practice in the Miramichi region, and in 1897 he would actually move out to the prairies in Calgary to work for the office of Sir James Lougheed. I think that's how you pronounce his
Mm.
name, Lougheed, not to be
Lucky.
confused with Lockheed.
Lucky.
Um, Regardless, but he went to work for this guy. James Lougheed is well known for his law practice and actually being a politician in his own right, which is why he was knighted.
Mm.
And despite some difficulties getting a foothold, he would actually succeed quite well in the end. And by the 1920s, he was actually a millionaire because,
Fun.
yeah, good for him. It was a great time to be a millionaire in the 1920s.
God.
But part of the reason why he was able to actually leverage that is because he was actually quite business savvy, right?
Mhm.
He made a lot of really good clients. One of his clients was the Hudson's Bay Company, the CPR, right, the Canadian Pacific Railway, the Royal Bank. Well, all of these were companies
Being
of
good at running a business makes not a good runner of a country, though.
that in mind. What?
Shockingly, I know for
Yeah,
some.
like, but just actually, that's a good question, I guess, to launch you. Like, when you say running a good business, what in your mind does that mean? Like, what would you need as qualities to run a business properly, at least by 1920 standard?
So it depends if we're talking about the standards of, if we're really talking about running a business, then we're talking about like running, making money. Like that's the end of
Yes.
the day. That's what businesses are for. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? They're
Yep.
just like that is their modus operandi.
Mm-hmm.
So if you make money and you do well with it, then hey, that's a good business, I guess.
Yeah. That's pretty much what he
Even
was
if
able to do, but from a lawyer's perspective, right?
even if all your workers don't have any money.
That's incidental. I have the money, so that's good.
Yeah, that's what matters.
But that's the thing, is that he technically, for some of these, didn't necessarily have an operating stock in or any kind of actual ownership in the companies like the Hudson's Bay Company, but he would leverage, right, as a lawyer, ways to get money and concessions from the government for these companies. And so what he would often get out of it were like land deals and better deals for the businesses he represented. And so he actually got in on what is one of the most lucrative investments that you can probably have, if even to this day, is real estate, right? Basically, that's what a
Hmm.
lot of these companies are. When you're dealing with the Canadian Pacific Railway, you're buying land that you can lay track on. When you're dealing with the Hudson's Bay Company, it's land that you can hunt on
Good
or
old
trade
Hudson's
on.
Bay Company.
Exactly. Or eventually even like build stores on, right? And it's the land underneath that store that really matter. So all of these things were ways that you could actually leverage a fat check, basically. And he also had his hands in like the cement business and electrical power, grain elevators. All of these things were slowly companies that Bennett would have at least some hand in.
Right.
With some partners, he would also found Calgary Brewing Company, which is ironic considering that he was a Methodist Sunday school teacher who would fulminate against, the demon of alcohol in
The
his young
devil's
age.
juice.
Yeah, exactly. The devil's juice. And, he made beer out of water from God's Rocky Mountains or whatever. So
God damn it.
the irony was quite delicious.
He had a taste of money finally. He wanted more.
Well, that's the big irony of like Protestant, right? Is like it always comes down to that irony or that not that contradiction, right? It's like self improvement often comes down
Mm.
to just unabashed capitalism, right? And often in ways that go against some of the values that you claim to preach of
Hmm.
helping others, right? In order to help yourself. And which is why a lot of rich people, if you look to the United States, are Protestant,
Hmm.
because those mentalities go hand in hand. Um, but this is not an episode on the United States. So we're going to have that in like 2 weeks. I don't know. So, yeah, obviously, after all of this, which party do you think he aligned himself with? A Methodist who makes a lot of money?
The right, whatever was the right at the time.
Just a conservative party.
It was just a conservative. There you go. He
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
conservative.
that's it.
Shocker.
Yep.
Religious and money driven.
Who knew? Shock. Oh, yeah. So he would get elected for the first time as an MP in Calgary West in 1911. So he would
Love it.
be 31 at the time. Yeah. And he, again, was, because he was a good lawyer and evidently a good businessman as well, who had basically his hand in everything that was being built in Alberta.
Hmm.
He was able to very quickly build a political career, as a lot of lawyers do, till to this day. So he was very quick-witted. He had a commanding manner and also a hot temper. Apparently, he was
Hmm.
very quick to anger, but being a man in the 1920s, he was able to actually say, "Oh, it's me being forceful and brave, not
Temper
hot-headed."
tantrum.
Exactly, not having a temper tantrum like a 5-year-old.
God.
Yeah.
They're
So there
the
you go.
worst.
This is our segment of men hating for the episode.
Whoopsies.
So he would be basically feared more than loved in the party, but still recognized as like someone who had a lot of potential to
Which will
lead
be
the
his
party.
downfall because fear will only last so long.
Do you feel like that's okay? Explain yourself.
You can only be afraid of something or someone for so long, like unless it's like an actual clinical like fear in your brain. You can only be afraid of a person for so long before you'd start to turn your emotions elsewhere.
Yeah.
Like that's one of my guiding philosophies as a teacher is like the kids shouldn't be afraid of me because they will only be afraid for so long and then they'll just get oppositional after a while.
Yeah. Gee, I wonder who you're talking about. This won't make
Yeah.
any sense to anyone.
But it's this idea that
Mhm.
like and we saw this like Trump isn't around right now because people are afraid of him. People are around Trump because they love him. Like they have a weird
Yeah.
obsession with him.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing how it went from fear to love, or at least the
Well, I
focus
mean, when
went
he
from fear
first
to love.
won, it was love. Like it's never been
Mhm.
fear.
I don't know. Was it fear of
I
was
guess
it fear
fear
of
of the socialists,
yeah,
the
exactly.
gay agenda.
Yeah. I wonder if that was part of what drove his particular form of populism in that case.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good idea though. Could think about
You
this
can
more,
only
but yeah.
yeah, well, no, just you can only be afraid for so long, and eventually
Yeah.
that's gonna like I'm sure that's gonna lead to R.B. Bennett's downfall eventually.
In some ways. He's also incompetent.
Yeah. Well, that's true. People who often rely on fear often use it to make up for their incompetence because they have nothing else.
Yeah. Also, again, I'm being facetious. I know, listener who's already writing a comment, whoever you may
For
be,
my mother,
right?
Elise.
No, again, I don't want to throw your mom under the bus here, but just I know I'm making a joke. He is competent in some respects. There are other things
He's
that would cause his
competent enough to
downfall.
become he's competent enough to like become prime minister.
Exactly, right? Which requires a certain set of skills that he used very effectively for a short while. Right?
Yes.
Spoiler: this is not going to be a very long episode. So uh, Arthur Meehan, who we mentioned before, would resign from leadership of the party in 1926. And because of the way that he had managed to cultivate his image as a rather important figure within the party, Bennett was chosen leader at the next convention, which took place in Winnipeg in October of 1927.
Mhm.
And again, he kind of immediately set to work to rebuild the party after the disaster that Meehan's leadership had been. So he is, again, putting the legwork, and presumably he put some of his own money in, as well as that of others, as one does, but he was able to actually self-finance a lot of
His
his
own
work.
money, I say in quotation marks.
Yes. Thank you for picking up on that in my voice. The money
You
of
got
the
it.
workers that he stole it from.
We call this wage theft, kids. Listen to Uncle
Exactly.
Big Bird.
Oh God. um, but yeah, so he would basically finance the party to the point of being able to rebuild it for actually a solid run against Mackenzie King's government, which we'll recall had when we last left Mackenzie King's government had just kind of fallen because of a customs scandal. Do you remember what the customs scandal was?
One. Oh, oh, you have to remind me. I remember reading it here. I remember us discussing, but I don't remember what it is. What was the custom scandal?
It's basically him. Like it was discovered that members of his parliament had partaken in some of the smuggling of alcohol
Of course.
across the border because Americans were still facing prohibition,
Hmm.
and people got a bit pissy about it.
They were making
Um,
money.
yeah, so Mackenzie
Yeah,
King's
that's the wild part. You see these people on the right being like, "Oh, like gotta let people do whatever they can to make money, blah blah," and then they do the thing to make money and they get in trouble for it.
but they're doing it immorally.
Where's the
Technically,
fucking line, man?
yeah, exactly. Technically, I'm using all the power of the law to make millions of dollars in my end.
Stupid.
Yeah. So not only was the customs scandal a thing, but also the beginning of the Depression did sour people's perceptions of someone like King, who, as a liberal, tended to be a little bit more free market oriented, open towards the United States, as well as willing to spend a little bit more on public expenditure, which with
Nice.
everything that was happening with the Depression was not necessarily something that people were initially open to, right? And so in 1930, in July 1930, the Conservatives would win the election with 137 seats out of 245 of them.
Jesus.
So really sweeping victory. And yeah, some people were kind of iffed about it, right? There was growing left opposition, which we talked about a little bit on last episode, to the general tendency of the economy and society was happening and developing in Canada, right? Some people, as I wrote in my notes, cheered that the country was finally in the hands of an expert, right? An expert in business that could take control of the country. And a few people on the left were like, but isn't it business people who also
where
rule
have
the
we
stock
heard
market?
that before?
Yeah, exactly.
The country's in the hand of the CEO who can fix the economy. Oh gosh, I wonder where we've heard that one before.
Also, it's the CEOs who just ruined the economy. They're the ones jumping out of buildings in New York because their stocks are terrible.
They're the ones who caused the stocks to fall in the first place.
Exactly. But hey, this one is different. I promise, bro. This one is different. This one's gonna save our life.
Just one more capitalist surge is gonna do.
We're one just more business mogul.
This billionaire, he can do it. This one.
This is a nice billionaire. This one got his money properly.
Yeah.
This one's a green billionaire.
All billionaires are bastards.
ABAB?
ABAB.
Oh God.
Even more so than cops, all billionaires are bastards.
It's all rotten all the way down. You're never going to convince me otherwise.
Who needs $1 billion? I'm sorry that this is a big tangent, but what the fuck are you doing with that money?
Hey, now
you're just compensating for daddy issues.
Sorry, Jimmy was doing something in the background.
That's fine.
But yeah, say more about daddy issues. Tell me about your daddy.
No, I don't have those daddy issues. Not those ones anyway. But these guys who just accumulate billions of dollars. What for? What are you doing with your money?
So I can not pay taxes.
Yeah, you're born like a dragon.
I can buy a private jet.
You know that Smaug, the dragon from Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
He had a literal mountain full of gold and gems, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They estimated how much that was actually worth. It still doesn't crack the top 5 richest people in the world. A literal dragon hoarding a actual mountain of gold and gems is still poorer than some of the people in the world right now. That's insane.
Wasn't the closest one Scrooge McDuck as far as fictional characters are concerned?
Yeah, well, Scrooge McDuck, I'm pretty sure Scrooge McDuck has
doesn't matter. The point is, it's absurd, and
the only one richer than them is the King of Wakanda.
But the whole point, right? To be absolutely fair, Bennett is not a billionaire. You're railing against billionaires, Max. He's just a multi-millionaire. Chill, right? So he's okay, obviously. He's one of the good guys, especially that billionaires weren't a thing at the time.
Yeah. Well, again, in that time, who needs $1 million?
Oh, exactly.
What are you gonna do? Buy an island to hunt people on?
I'm sure that's happened. There's no doubt in my mind that someone tried to do. I mean, isn't that the whole thing of Dutch colonialism? They pillaged an island and killed people on it. Isn't that what they did in Indonesia?
Of a bad novel.
Yeah. No, I know. That's just colonialism.
The richest fictional character is $65.4 billion. So Scrooge McDuck has $65.4 billion. Net worth of richest people.
I'm loving this.
Elon Musk is 245 billion.
That's great.
An actual fictional character made to be the greediest penny pitching bastard on the world still has less money than the richest man in the world.
Yeah. Hold on to that image. That image of the stereotype of millionaires, the literal Monopoly man. Hold on to that image. I'm going to describe an image for you that I saw in a book and that I wasn't able to link in the show notes, but I will describe this image to you and try to upload it for listeners by the time this episode, because that will haunt you. Anyway, so in 1930, Bennett comes to power. Unfortunately, it was not a good time to be in power because it was 1930 and everything sucked. So we've talked about before, as we've talked about before, most were suffering through the Depression, most in the world, right? Canada was more vulnerable because most of our stuff was exported, right? And food-based. And so when we got hit with dust bowls and ecological damage, as well as people closing off their borders left, right, and center. We died.
Ecological damage.
Yeah, 100 years ago. How about that?
Ah!
Ah,
This
don't you
man
just
is
love
the
it?
worst.
To be fair, he wasn't the precise cause of that. That was like an actual natural disaster that hit most of the North American Midwest of like
But
a
natural disasters don't come from nowhere.
that is true.
Ecological disasters are fueled by climate change.
Mm-hmm. But he was not the specific cause of like he was part of a system that absolutely encouraged that. So we can't blame entirely Bennett. We can blame the system that did put that into
But we can
place.
still blame partly Bennett, can't we?
Yeah.
I feel like as a man with all that money and power, he played a fairly more significant role than the guy who's just trying to make a wage in a factory somewhere.
What you mean his investments and participation in the growing of things like coal-based railways and the Hudson's Bay Company and cement companies was not good for the
Yeah, quick,
environment?
quick, quick reminder for everybody there. Your money in the bank isn't actually your money. It's the bank's money that they give back to you when you need it.
And they often use it to invest in oil companies. It's great.
Man, I hate living like why does
You
everything
love the
suck?
21st century.
Man.
Look, would you rather live now or in the same situation but 100 years ago? Is all I'm
Well, I
saying.
know I know I need to live now. It's just like, man, everything is really bad.
It's also like a false dichotomy. I just want things to be better, you know? Is that too much to ask?
I don't
Yes.
want my money to yeah. Anyway, we should probably get back on track before we get accused of too much communism.
Good. I don't care. Accuse me of being a communist. I don't give a fuck.
I don't fuck with you.
So
So
go ahead, please.
So Canada's suffering through the depression, right? That's where we are right now.
That's where we are. Shocker. Right. We again
Shocker.
we
Everything is
talked about
awful, and the
we
person
talked
in
about
charge
this
is a millionaire.
we talked about this like a couple of episodes for the
Yeah,
last couple of episodes. So I mostly want to focus on Bennett's response
Bennett.
and how like politically
I
he
just
responded
think
to it.
it's funny that like we always have this belief billionaires have to know what they're doing.
No,
They have to know. They have to know it's like no, this is a country, not a company.
they know what they're doing, but what they're doing is not in your best interest.
Yeah, well, that's just it. And that's what happens when you elect a CEO. They're not acting in the interest of you, the citizens of their like. Because if you want them to run the country like a company, most companies don't care about the people that are in the company.
They don't even know their names.
Yeah,
They know
like
nothing.
that's the problem with all these people. Like elect the CEO, elect the business. No, don't elect businessmen. They don't care about you. They care about their bottom line.
The CEO exists to shift enough money around to give himself and his shareholders a fat bonus for Christmas.
I should I should know about that one. Like I'm
Whatever.
bitching, but I also speak very much as a beneficiary of the system.
Like someone has to benefit from it. Like your benefit is good for you, right? For
Mm.
actually being able to benefit from it doesn't make it any less unjust or ridiculous in some sense, right? Like that's just it.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. So yeah, Bennett was genuinely optimistic though when he entered office. From what I've read in the sources, he seemed again to have this idea that the market was just going to kind of regulate itself out of the crisis and then it was going to be smooth sailing because
Mhm.
no one had ever seen otherwise before. So there was no reason not to believe that. He would be proven wrong, of course. And basically, what people realized over the course of the Bennett years was just how plainly wealth and political power went just hand in hand. And one of the image I was talking about earlier that I saw in one of the books I was researching was there's this great picture from around this time when he was first elected to power.
Mhm.
I think it was in like 1931 or something like that. The picture was taken, where it's him, the premier of France, on the White House lawn, right? And so this is like the peak of the Depression in like the early 30s. And both of them are just in their full penguin ass suits, right? With a gold chain around their lapels and the white gloves and a top hat. And he literally just, if you ever see a picture of Bennett, he just looks like the Monopoly man. He is literally the caricature that you would put a millionaire in, like a robber baron in, an oil tycoon for a caricature. That's
He's a
just him.
bad, yeah.
And he's just chilling on the White House lawn like an idiot.
He probably thought it made him look cool or something.
I'm sure it did. A penguin suit does make you look cool sometimes, but you're also a
On the
dipshit.
right person, it does.
Yeah,
And in the right scenario. Like you can't just wear a penguin suit anywhere, you know?
of course not. did you actually have a look at the caricatures that
Yes.
okay.
Go.
So let's look at
Okay.
the first one. So part of the things that Bennett did during the Depression, I remind you, was reinstill some of the stuff that King had removed. So one of the things that King did in his first term in office was to remove titles for Canadians, right? That you could no longer receive British titles as Canadian citizen. So you can no longer become a sir or a dame or anything like that. What you got was the Order of Canada or some variation thereof, right? And that was King's way of not only nationalizing pride in exceptional Canadians, but also making things a little bit more equal for certain
Mhm.
people, or at least removing this sense of hierarchy, like a fucking communist, right? Um, so, what do you see in this first caricature, the one where he's screaming in a mic?
Yeah, so we've got a microphone. It's his sort of mouthpiece. It's got Ottawa on it. Obviously, a little like caricature at the top of the steeple of the Parliament building, little Ottawa flag. And his radio message goes out to a group of men and a dog who are sitting at a table. The great work of national reconstruction goes on. I have just restored titles for Canadians. And you have one that's a farmer and then another two that are unemployed. Isn't that lovely? Wheat agreement, taxes, relief, and then the poor dog is sitting there with his paper saying Archdale.
He's the, uh, but yeah, what do you get from this caricature?
Again, you've got him in, like, he doesn't care about the people in the country. He just cares about like what things he can put on. Again, he's just like the Monopoly man.
The caricature, that is literally what he was wearing in that picture. I cannot stress this enough. This is just copy
Uh,
pasted from what he was legit wearing in that picture I
this man is
described.
a cartoon character, like and it's very much highlighting again like the disconnect, the radio blasting out, telling this story over the radio waves, the Great Reconstruction, titles, blah blah blah. And it's like meanwhile the real people of Canada are like, great, that's so much fun. I love it. I love it here.
Thank God this farmer who's going through starvation can now get a title. But yeah, it does go on to, it does show, again, just the faith that Bennett and others had in the system, right? Not just their disconnect, as you were saying, which I agree with, but just it's just going to fix itself. So might as well focus on something else, right? Because in a
Mm.
couple of years, this won't even be a problem. So I think that's a really good place to start, where Bennett's tenure is concerned. But of
Mhm.
course, it would only get worse because it didn't resolve itself overnight. Surprise, surprise. Right. And so as the years went on, right, he would realize that you had to do something, right? You couldn't just keep the ship
Yeah.
running as is. So he did start putting measures into place to at least keep the economy afloat, right? Because it was just on a relentless downturn. It just kept going down, down, down. The US were cutting back on its imports, and they were demanding payments on its Great War loans that nobody could pay back because no one had any money. So it just kept spiraling, right? And Mackenzie King, as leader of the opposition, was of course relentless
Mhm.
in putting him on blast, to use a modern term. Um, and yeah, that gets us to our second cartoon, the egg one. Did you see that one?
Oh yeah, I took a look at the egg one.
Mhm.
It's
For it.
go. Yeah, so it's basically we got a big old picture of Bennett. He's got eggs. He's sorting them government business, national bond indebtedness, and he's using the light of national honor to look at them. Meanwhile, he tosses out repudiation and default. Hmm?
You
You
get
you
from
could
this one as meeting.
oh, he's cloaking everything under national honor to try and hide his bullshit. He's gonna pretend.
Not actually doing anything, right? He's not
Yeah, he's not
defaulting
actually
on these
doing
loans
anything
or
doing anything to pay them back.
no, of course not. And this one was made, we're not sure. It's somewhere between 1930 and 1935. So it could have been anywhere during his actual tenure as prime minister. So we're not exactly sure. But considering that he would actually do some stuff later, I assume it's early on
Mm.
in his tenure as prime minister. I would say probably this is like early 1930s, 1930, something like that. But I don't know. So eventually he would try something, as a good prime minister does. Eventually he gets his head out of his ass.
Yeah.
And what he did was completely ignore the farmers and their demands for free trade, right? And he said, you know what? I think I know better. I think I know what the farmers can use, right? As someone who has obviously worked a lot on the farm, I don't think free trade with the United States is what is going to work here. But you know what did work in the past? And you know who's one of my heroes as a conservative, right? Is William is not William, sorry, is John A. Macdonald's good old national policy.
We love the national policy. It always works. 100% of the time, it works 70% of the time.
Maybe. So yeah, that's basically what he did again. He's like, yeah, let's try this. Let's throw this at the wall and see what sticks. And so he jacked up tariffs against the United States as his people were starving. So he technically did something. Is it good? No.
No. Technically, I don't know.
Like, to be fair, again, he wasn't the only one to do that. The Americans were also doing that. Europe was doing that. Everyone was kind of closing up its walls, right? And trying to like hoard resources for its own population. And that's very much the language that he couched it in when he pitched this kind of national policy 2.0, which is just protectionism with a fancy name. But what he called it was economic patriotism, which is a brilliant marketing move from a businessman. You don't call it the national policy. So a lot of these terms kind of helped drum up some slight support for this protectionism. But ultimately, again, in a system that was increasingly connected, it ultimately made a small dent in the overall problems of facing Canadian society at that moment. And this is where I had another caricature, the one with the farmer like getting out of the depression. Did you see that one as well? The one with the ladder.
Oh yeah, he's climbing Bennett's ladder.
Yeah.
Assistance in mixed farming, assistance needy farmers, credit arrangements to prevent forced selling, guarantee a foreign market.
So,
and this is all stuff Bennett isn't doing essentially.
Pretty much, or at least not at first,
because he needs a national policy.
Later, again, that would change. He would start to implement some of these things towards the end of his tenure, but by then it would kind of be a too little, too late type of thing.
Well, yeah, because he realized, oh yeah, I'm going to lose the goddamn vote.
There you go.
And at that point in time, we weren't trying to claim that elections were fake.
Exactly. I'm sure someone did that sometime, but yeah, basically what the caricature is pointing to in this case is like the need to actually give support for these things. You can't just expect them to resolve themselves. And I was actually quite surprised to see the first ladder, right? Negotiations with China. I didn't realize just how much it would have been on people's minds at that time to actually do that kind of negotiation with a power such as China's. But was kind of surprised on that one. I guess it was on people's mind. So cool. But of course, we're talking about the Depression here. That was not the only thing that Bennett had on his mind. Because
no, of course not.
Have you ever heard of the Statute of Westminster, Mac?
Yes, that one I have heard of. That's the thing that would have let us get out of the war, wasn't it? Or choose to whether or not we join Britain in a war.
Okay. Explain a little bit more.
So that's the only thing I really know about it, is that the Statute of Westminster was a agreement or a political thing between Canada and the UK. Sorry, I'm still feeling a little sick, so my brain isn't up to its usual speed. But it was part of it gave Canada the freedom to essentially decide if it would join Britain in war or not. So if Britain declared war, Canada technically didn't have to join.
That's like one of the things that it allows it to do, right?
So one of the bigger ones, in my opinion.
So basically, there was an imperial conference, as there was often at that time, where all of Britain's colonies and Commonwealth nation kind of got together and decided what's the best plan of action for the empire. And so Canada was one of them, and apparently Bennett was quite the figure at the Imperial Conference where the Statute of Westminster was decided. He was quite the nationalist and did stand his own against Britain's more forceful hand. And yeah, out of the Balfour Report, which we talked about under Mackenzie King, in 1931, the British Parliament introduced for all of its Commonwealth nations what was called the Statute of Westminster, wherein all the dominions were proclaimed independent, right? So Canada, New Zealand, Australia, all of that. Newfoundland technically would have been its own dominion, except when the dominions couldn't sort their stuff out, right? Like if they needed to appeal to a higher power, then they would go to Britain. But otherwise, they were basically an independent nation. And I think people kind of forget that this is under Bennett, right? This major step towards Canadian independence would have been under him, right? Which is a pretty, notable achievement, right, on his end, or at least, again, he wasn't alone in making this, but it is notable that it is under his government that this would happen. So basically, we were an independent nation with a constitution that was owned by another independent nation. So a very Canadian situation at the end of the day, but it is something. But yes, it would have a major impact. You're absolutely right on the looming war.
The looming war,
which is still like 8 years away at this point.
But people could see it on the horizon. Let's be realistic right now. Manchuria is getting, and then, Germany is not exactly looking super friendly, and they're going to start invading places. Like we like to pretend World War II started just in 1939, but it's been building for a while.
Some historians who argue that we should actually say like it started in like 37 or 36 or something like that, just because
I've met like teachers and all that say it started in 1933.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, with the invasion of
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Anyway,
so we talked about this all of the last episode, but this is just your mid-episode reminder that in order to deal with a protest that was rising in the west of Canada, what Mackenzie King decided to do was to send in cops and RCMP and beat the protesters. We talked about it last episode.
How your political leader deals with dissidents tells you a lot about them.
Oh, yeah. There's a reason why some people in the book that we talked about, the 10 Lost Years, called him a fascist.
There's a reason for that.
No, but I can see the vibes. So yeah, basically, just a quick reminder for people who had not listened to that episode, there was a major protest by people who were in labor camps, and they were protesting the horrible conditions that a lot of them were in. And so they set up this whole big trek, right, that was supposed to go from Vancouver to Ottawa. And at some point in Regina, Bennett decided that he had quite enough of these people, right? And so he sent in armed to basically gas them out and beat them. And quite a few, I think it was, I forget the number off the top of my head, but many hundreds of people were actually injured. And I think some people died. So not a great look. And it was very much the beginning of the end for Bennett. But again, by this point, this is towards the end of his tenure. But by this point, despite cracking down on dissidents, he would start to see significant shifts, or at least a loosening of his very conservative, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, the market is going to regulate itself type of mentality. So like in 33, 34, and 35, he would start to put in like more interventionist policy, right? Things like price fixing or broadcast regulations and other such pesky meddling into the economy, right? He would actually start to implement those things. He would, for example, also put in or help establish the Bank of Canada, right, in 1934, which was meant to shore up the Canadian financial system, right? It was supposed to be useful and permanent. It wouldn't ultimately create rain that could shower the prairies in much needed water, but it was going to help. Right? It was going to do something. And it basically, for those who don't know, the Bank of Canada, its job is to operate between the government and various commercial banks, right? Which is means to ensure the proper ratio between like rents of lending and borrowing. Sorry, you were going to say something.
It's basically the thing that helped Canada weather the 2008 financial crisis a lot more than other countries.
So countries do have, like, there is technically the Federal Reserve. It's not quite the same thing, the Federal Reserve in the US, but yeah, it is.
But like our system was a lot stronger for that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. So it is established here, which again, perhaps too little, too late, but it's good.
But
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
also not something he believes in. It's a response to polling data.
Show. Because by that point, what you start to see is like within his own party, there starts to be dissent. And that's a
Mhm.
problem. Right. So one of the famous examples for Bennett's concerned is with H. Stevens, who was the guy who exposed King's custom scandal. Right. He was that person.
Yeah.
And so this time he was back, but he was looking at Bennett's party,
Yeah.
or his own party, right? Because he was a member of the Conservative Party, Stevens was.
But
Um,
hey, that's some good integrity right there.
it does show that he actually has a moral backbone. Um, and basically, he was someone who had become increasingly disillusioned with conservative mindset as it was seen in the 1930s, because his area, right, or his riding, I should say, was a mining country in British Columbia, and they were not doing well at all during the Depression.
Mhm.
And while it didn't turn him entirely against capitalism as a system, like it did with a lot of people, what it did do is make him realize that you couldn't leave it unchecked. Right. And there had to be some kind of system of checks and balances that was put into place, because otherwise it would just be disastrous all the time. See the United States for a good example of that. And so basically he persuaded himself that, like, okay, this problem of runaway and unchecked capitalism is perhaps a little bit more serious than a customs scandal, maybe.
Mhm.
And so he set up a whole investigation at Bennett's behest, to find evidence that businessmen were, surprise, surprise, getting rich off of the backs of the few that were remaining employed, and basically running sweatshops across the country. They were watering stocks and, wringing every single penny that they could out of a financial disaster.
Mhm.
Bennett was not happy with this conclusion, because he was one of those people, and his friends were some of these people.
God
So I should say, I don't think Bennett was named specifically in the investigation, but like he was very much
Come
someone
on,
who
no,
would
but
have,
like, come on.
yeah,
He wasn't
yeah,
named, but like, let's be real.
certainly, like he was well respected by the business people who were named, right, and who
Mhm.
did perform these practices. Like basically, the Conservative Party had become by that point the party of these businessmen.
Yeah.
Um, and so Stevens was not fired from the party or removed from the party, but he was heavily encouraged to resign from the party,
Mhm.
which he did. And he went on to form a very short lived party called the Reconstruction Party, which was like a right populist type of party. It was, again, kind of what you'd see today as like a moderate conservative party. Uh, Wants capitalism, but with some regulations, was basically what it was standing on. And it won like
Which is,
10% of the vote.
better.
It's better. It's something.
Yeah.
Right? It won like 10% of the vote in 1935, which is the equivalent of one seat. Um, so
It's
good
like
for
the Green
them.
Party.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, in the same space as the Green Party, it won in British Columbia, if I remember correctly. So right
Yo,
around,
BC is just all over the place. BC doesn't give a shit.
it's all the legal drugs that they can do now, obviously.
Whoa, smoke weed every day.
So, things like the Stevens incident, I guess you can call it, did push Bennett to actually take more serious action, like the Bank of Canada, like I said. But by the end of his tenure, as the election, like you were saying, was coming, he did realize that he had to give people a little bit more than just
Mhm.
another bank, right? Or a different
Another
style of
banger.
bank. Yeah. So he did propose changes, and surprise, surprise, he proposed changes that were oddly similar to the ones that Mackenzie King had proposed just before he got ousted from office in 1930. Interesting how that works. Anyway, in 1935, in January of 1935, he went on the radio and announced what has since been called Bennett's New Deal, as a kind of parallel, of course, to FDR's New Deal.
We love
Um,
it.
yep. And he basically announced that he was going to make the greatest reform that Canadian government had ever dreamed of, really like laying it on thick. And so basically, he made a series of speeches, that explained that, he was going to put into place things like, minimum wages, or a maximum working week, or different levels of taxation, that kind of stuff. right? Again, very similar to FDR's New Deal. And people all over the country were like, sounds good. But you also are the monopoly man, so why would I trust you at this point?
You also caused all these problems. Why didn't you do this earlier?
Exactly. And, one wonders how any of those bone thin farmers, if they had gotten near a radio, how they would have reacted to hear such things coming out of Bennett in that very specific moment. I can only imagine the series of expletives that would have come out of their bone dry mouths. So anyway, basically no one was really much convinced by Bennett's like end of term vote fast, if you will.
Mhm.
He did want to provide, or he did claim that he wanted to come to the aid of both labor and capitalists. And sure, I'm sure he made it as sound as convincing as he possibly could, right? But ultimately, people had realized that after 5 years, not much had changed. And so, despite the fact that Mackenzie King was, as leader of the opposition, kind of in a dicey place where he had to argue against his own policies because Bennett was just repurposing Mackenzie King's own ideas.
But it's also like you just say you stole them. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure
you can
King will
also,
be fine.
and he was, right? Because in 1935, the Conservative Party did a little bit better than they were expecting, but they still got their ass handed to them. They won about 30% of the popular vote. And they only elected about 40 members to parliament, where liberals won 173. And there were other minor parties here and there, like that did get parties like the Progressive Party, the Reconstruction Party, and so on, would also get some of those votes.
Mhm.
But yeah, like there were, again, we've talked about this. There were other incidents where people would try to put into place little personal pools, like the farmers would try to pool their resources together to actually help themselves, like wheat pools, for example, without the help of the government. But
Yeah.
ultimately, like it was very little compared to what you had to do
You,
in
you
the face
need what
of.
you actually needed.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And
Did you
so,
ever
like,
hear about those auctions that would happen?
no, what are you talking
So
about?
farmers' land gets repossessed, right? Because they can't
Mhm.
pay their taxes or their bills, so it has to be sold.
Sure.
So a lot of farmers in the area they would get together at this auction, and the farmer lost his land would be like, "I wait or I 1 cent, 5 cents, like ludicrously small amounts." And anytime some kind of like robber baron-esque guy would like try and raise his hand, he would just get glared down by a group of farmers.
You will be stabbed if you if you take
If
any
you try
money.
and take this person's farm, you are going to die.
I mean, good for them. That's how you should react to
Yeah.
robber baron.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Anyway, I'm not going to explain myself at this moment. So what is interesting is that because of his kind of end of career, end of prime ministership decisions, despite the fact that he's gone down in history as someone who's associated with a gasless car, right? The Bennett buggy is literally named after him. That's the most striking image that people imagine of him, and basically his incompetence in the face of the Depression. What what you see with Bennett is also the rise of a lot of the centralized Canadian institutions that are still with us today, right? Like
Yeah.
Canada as an independent nation, the Bank of Canada, the Canadian Wheat Board was put into place during that time for price control, which I don't think still exists today, but some form of centralized institution was still put into place during his time. And so there are some remnants to Bennett's tenure. Unfortunately, he also had the unfortunate position of being prime minister during arguably the hardest times to be prime minister for the Depression, which is right at the beginning when everyone's scrambling. So yeah, only that you can't tell like what would have happened if a different government had been in place. Surely they could have tried to do something earlier,
But
but
we also have to live in the real world of this is what actually happened at
yeah,
the end of the day.
exactly. Right. So
And it doesn't
I
look good for Bennett.
no, no, it does not. So he would be leader of the opposition for a few years, right after he stopped being prime
Right.
minister. Uh, but he would ultimately resign in 1938.
Oh,
So
that's good.
yeah, 4 years after he lost the election. He never was prime minister again. It was only during those 4.5 years. And he would retire to England after his retirement from Parliament. And he was actually made a Viscount by Winston Churchill in 1941.
Fully just mask off now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, dude's living his best life.
Dude's living the dream he always wanted.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I want titles and I want to be a rich Monopoly man. I can only do that in England, apparently.
I can. God damn it.
And so, yeah, in 19, he would basically spend the rest of his life as a aristocrat. I mean, that's basically what he did. And his life didn't last much longer. After he was made Viscount, he would die in 1947, in June 1947, of a heart attack in England. And he would actually be buried there. He is actually the only prime minister in Canadian history to not be buried in Canada. He still is buried in England. His body was never repatriated. And he actually kind of disowned Canada. He claimed very shortly before he died that he led his country and they no longer want him. So it'll be easier for Canada if I'm just not there. Fuck them. And so he just left.
They don't want me anyway. Who cares?
Exactly.
And you know what? Kind of respect it.
Yeah, I respect the self-awareness of it. Yep. That's the best I can say. Okay. So let me pull up the list here. Unless you have it in front of you.
I do not have it in front of me.
Okay, hold on. Let me pull up the list here. But what are you feeling as far as Bennett for our ranking as it's going currently?
He's gonna have to be a bit on the lower side for sure. So what are the rankings right now?
I'm trying to pull it up here. There we go. So top is still MacDonald and Laurier. Then it's Borden at number 3. Alexander Mackenzie, number 4. And then
King's first tenure.
We haven't put King yet because we were going to do it all in one shot.
Yeah.
And then it's all the 4 conservatives who were scrambling.
The 4 clown car.
Yeah, exactly. After MacDonald died. And at the bottom is Arthur Meehan.
Honestly, I think the debate is really just, does he go above or below Meehan?
What do you feel?
Because you are right. He was in a really shit situation.
Yeah.
And so I think for that, he does go above Meehan because Meehan basically could have had he could have been handed he was basically handed a post World War I economy on a plate.
Yeah.
And he still messed it up. Meanwhile, Bennett was handed a national depression.
Yeah.
I still think he's horrible. I still think he goes below the 4 clown cards, but I do think he's above Meehan.
Just the guys who were just fill-ins are still better.
Listen, that's the standard for if you're actually good or bad as a prime minister. Can you beat the clown car?
Yeah, first in rankings, because usually in general rankings that have been made in official polls, places the clown car at the bottom. No one gives a shit about them. But I like this ranking. Are you better or worse than the clown car?
Well, because here's the thing. You can be mediocre. Bennett is famous, but not for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
You forget about the clown car, but that's because they didn't do anything. So it's just a bleh. What were they good at or supposed to do, you know?
That's the thing. They were supposed to just be stopgaps until the next election. They technically accomplished their jobs.
And so they are, technically speaking, they didn't ruin the economy. They
didn't starve people.
Yeah, they didn't lead to the Dust Bowl. They didn't cause a Great Depression.
They weren't oil barons.
Yeah. So I'd say we just I think they're a great marker of what it takes to actually be actively bad as a prime minister in Canada.
Okay. We just gonna kneecap this motherfucker and put him at the bottom.
Above Meehan. I think he goes above Meehan.
Okay, above Meehan.
Do you agree with that? I don't know.
Okay, let's do that. Okay.
Do you think he goes above the clown car?
No, I don't think so either. I think he
Borden above Mackenzie King. Wait. So it's MacDonald, Laurier, Borden, King, the clown car.
I think so far, yeah. He may change.
And Meehan.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to review this list at some point. We're just gonna have to do a yearly prime minister review to see if we're still happy with the list.
Yeah, that's fair. I think King is gonna.
Once we get off of King, we should do a full review. King is gonna fuck with this list so hard, I swear.
It's gonna make it so much better, dude. It's not even funny.
Because he's basically he's Canada's Mount Rushmore, you know, like as far as prime ministers go, like he's that
Yeah.
iconic one. Him, Laurier, McDonald, and then Daddy Trudeau.
Daddy Trudeau.
Trudeau mania is coming.
In 100 years, bro.
Yo, we're about to be in World War II, and then it's just 20 years later.
I know. Oh, do you know what our next episode is?
What?
Women's rights. Not women's rights in
Let's
general,
go.
but like the person's case. I'm down for
Yeah.
that.
Are we
Yeah,
gonna bring
yeah, yeah.
Camille on?
Yeah, I'll try to get her on.
Yay.
Cool, cool, cool. All right.
Cool. Toy. Nice.
Nice.
But yeah, I think that works for the list. I don't.
Yeah.
Because again, like you said, he did establish certain good things, but you can also tell that was very much political maneuvering, not actual like I'm doing this because I believe in this.
Yeah, exactly. So, good for him. He
Yeah,
tried.
he's better than, well, that's just it. At the end of the day, I do think he was given a really shit situation to work with.
Yeah, exactly. So
And I think that's what put him above Mia, is that Mia was actively given like a fairly productive situation and then shat the bed.
yeah, decided to quote Shakespeare at people.
Yeah. Know your audience, my dude.
No,
So after this,
not.
of course, is the return of the king.
Yep, forever.
He never left. He never leaves.
No, there is a brief moment when he's not there anymore. But I think we can just do it. No,
Love
that's
it.
true because we wanted to do part 2 and then part 3. Oh my god, it's just going to be interminable. Who's the intermediate?
It's Lauren something.
Is he? Is it Louis Saint Laurent?
Yeah, that's the one.
I thought he was later, but no, that makes sense. Okay, cool. All right, Mac, take us away.
All right, folks. Thanks everyone for listening. As always, you can reach out with any questions, comments, or hate mail on the Facebook page or by email. You can support the show through PayPal to pay what you feel the show's worth, or on Patreon. You can find perks like extra and ad-free episodes also on Patreon. But as always, this is optional. We keep this open and free for the people, and this show will still remain free and independent as always. Vive la révolution! But if you do want to help out, feel free to leave a review on iTunes, share with some friends. It's always appreciated. And then we'll see you again next time on Historia Canadiana. Cheers!